two friends of mine, John Warren, who I'd been working with on Outbreak and many shows, really my whole career, and Doug Miller, who we had met at Boss. We had an opportunity to start our own company, and we'd been hoping to do something like that. And so we started a company called Vision Crew Unlimited, went out on our own, and we're making a go of it. And we were working on a lot of commercials and features and different things. Come around a few years after being in business, things were getting quite busy in Hollywood. There were a lot of movies being made, and everybody needed miniatures. And so Les Ecker and Pat McClung had both gone to Digital Domain after Boss, and we knew both those guys from Boss. And Digital Domain had 3 movies happening at one time that summer. Titanic, which was a huge model show, Fifth Element, and Dante's Peak. All 3 of these movies were happening at the same time, and Digital Domain's model shop was completely buried. So Les was running the model shop overall, and then each of those shows had a model supervisor or a couple model supervisors in the case of Titanic. One by one, each of those shows, we ended up helping out at Vision Crew as a subcontractor for Digital Domain. And so for Titanic, they were building this sort of museum quality 44-foot long miniature of the 20th scale of the Titanic in all its glory, and then a sunken wreck version of that same ship. And they were putting their model shop together, and there was just not enough talent to go around between all these shows, right? And so each show kind of got some good people, and then what they were able to do was utilize our group, which was a completely different group of people, to kind of fill in some gaps where they needed help. For Titanic, the 44-foot ship, all the deck detail of that ship, we're talking about all the ventilators, lifeboats, davits, 2,000 portholes, like a bunch of different pieces, all the cranes, all these different pieces had to be made for that ship. And so we essentially made all the patterns, made all the molds, made all the parts, thousands of parts, and then deliver those parts to the model shop in Playa del Rey that they had set up. It was like an ancillary thing they had set up, run by George Stevens and Gene Rizzardi. And so those guys were running this huge crew of boat builders. They were basically building this insane, amazing boat, an incredible piece of work. And they were doing a lot of other things. They were building tugboats and the Carpathia and other things. They had a lot of stuff going on. And what they needed for this was a really highly detailed, a bunch of parts that could then go on the model and be painted. And Bruce McRae was running the paint department for them. And so we were kind of like a division of their model shop in a way, and we basically made a zillion of these parts. And I remember bidding the show, because when we were bidding it, trying to figure out how much it was going to cost, nobody really knew. There weren't a lot of detailed plans of the Titanic around because it wasn't at sea very long, and there weren't a lot of photographs of it. And so we actually bought one of the Revell kits, and we counted like how many ventilators are there, and there's these big ones, and then there's these small ones, and we kind of that's how we started the bid, was just figure out how many of these things we needed to build. Once we got the job, then we were attached to Ken Marshall, who Cameron had brought on to be kind of a Titanic expert. That's one of he's a map painter, but one of his hobbies was Titanic, and so he had a wealth of information for us, and exactly how many rivets were on each thing, and all this kind of stuff. And everything was incredibly detailed, really, really crazy. Like the ventilators were all hollow. The construction quality was an insanely challenging show at a time when there weren't a lot of people to hire. So we went out to model shops and hobbyists and stuff, just trying to find people that we could get in to help us with this project. And then meanwhile, while we're doing that, Fifth Element comes in, and Mark Stetson's team has a need for, basically Mark's specialty is building these 24th scale cities, right, which he had done for Hudsucker Proxy and stuff, and the Shadow and all these things. And so now it was like, okay, well, we need a futuristic city, so we need to build these 20-foot tall buildings, and we need, I don't know, 100 of them or something. I can't remember. It was a lot. And so their model shop was building all of them they could. They're using, laser cutting and rapid prototyping techniques and stuff like this, but they can't keep up. There's just way too many. So they asked us to build some buildings for them, and we ended up building 3 buildings at our shop, sort of not the hero buildings, just some background buildings for them. So we built those. And then separately, we bid to do the Fifth Element warship. So once again, it was like they needed a highly detailed. The model was really designed as almost like a bulging ice cream sandwich, but where the ice cream would be was a whole bunch of Star Wars nerdy sexiness, right? Like just like crazy Star Wars ship stuff in there. It was a pretty simple ship to build otherwise. I mean, it was really just a steel frame construction. It was pretty straightforward, but all the detail kind of went into the ice cream sandwich part. And there weren't really any designs for that. It was just sort of generally like put a bunch of stuff in there. And so we got to have a lot of fun with that. And John Ferrari built for us the conning tower part of that ship. And we, sort of brought that in, and he put a lot of time and energy into that. And then we bolted that onto the end of it. And so we built that whole thing. It kind of seems crazy. We built that whole thing with gray primer. That's all we did. And then gave it to Digital Domain. Their model shop ultimately put all the lighting in it, all the fiber optics. They kind of reverse engineered all that stuff into this ship that we had finished, which is insane, but that's what we did. And then they did a beautiful paint job on it. And so that all happened after we handed it off. So it was really a partnership. And then while we were doing that, meanwhile, Alan Fauché was running the model shop for Dante's Peak. That movie was up against Volcano and for their release date, and so everyone was a big rush. So Pat McClung was the visual effects supervisor on Dante's. Pat was an amazing visual effects supervisor and perfectly cast for this movie, which was like, had some of the biggest miniature sequences that I'd ever seen. And honestly, to this day, I mean, the Volcano, the bridge scene, that whole setup, the dam breaking bridge scene setup, that scene was insane. We got contracted at Vision Crew to build Humvees, 1 to 3.5 scale, so a little bigger than quarter scale. This would become a signature scale for Pat McClung. He hit that scale a few times with him. He just felt like quarter scale was just a little too small, and maybe just a little too easy. So 3.5 scale, much easier on the math, right? So anyway, so we were contracted to build these Humvees in the middle of these other jobs. I mean, we're doing all 3, Titanic, Fifth Element, and Dante's at the same time. So it was a very busy time for us. But those Humvees had to basically, the kind of the creative brief on them was, they had to match these production Humvees they had, but they had to look fantastic. They wanted to literally jump the camera with them. They had to be very close. They had to be detailed on all sides. And they had to be able to hold up to an immense amount of abuse because the scene was going to be just beating them up like crazy. They didn't have to drive. They were pulled on a shark fin kind of like, rig. So they didn't need to drive, but they didn't need to be able to steer. So they had remote control steering. They had remote control windshield wipers and little guys inside and all that kind of stuff. But the main Humvees were, you couldn't drive them. And they were just beefy. And they could hold up to anything. I mean, if you look at the movie, you can't tell their models. They're just gorgeous. So we were real proud of those Humvees. I remember delivering the Humvees to the set and being very proud of ourselves because we worked really hard on these things and they looked great and we thought they were really cool, and we pulled up and you couldn't see anything but a sea of scaffolding. The set that they were building to use these Humvees in was this insane tank up on top with a weir system that would pour the water down and then create like this huge rush of water to take out the bridge, and then and there were like 100,000 Christmas trees. It was insane. And then that same rig could be they had 8 storm pumps, like these huge gasoline powered gigantic flood pumps that would pump the water back up to the top release tank, and then you could divert all that water to the other side of the set, which was the dam breaking. It was absolutely jaw-dropping. And I just remember we had our Humvees and we came with our Humvees and they're like, yeah, put them over there. There was just so much going on at that time that it was like, yeah, the Humvees, whatever. So that was a crazy time for us. We were doing 3 shows back to back, and each of them with completely different set of challenges and And it was great to be a part of all of those shows because they were, on each of them we were working with guys that we had worked with since the start of our careers, at Boss and before. So it was a cool, those were cool gigs.